Hello, crypto world. Welcome to the Chart Historian. My name is Justin, and on this channel, I delve deep into crypto charts, exploring chart structures, fractals, and patterns. In this video, I want to talk about XRP. I want to analyze the structure and throw out some different possibilities. I also want to take a look at Bitcoin and the Bitcoin dominance chart, as well as the Dow Jones, just to give a greater overall picture of where we are. So as we can see, we have this nice move up on the XRP chart. Now, I'm going to present the case that this is potentially the peak, and I'm also going to present a case that this is not the peak. So to start off, let's talk about this being the peak. So if this was the peak, and the reason why I'm even entertaining this idea is from a structural point of view, that possibility does exist, so we need to acknowledge it. Okay, so to begin with, we need to first understand that XRP has a macro repetitive structure. As I point out in many of my videos, these structures include range-bound times, bull runs, and declines. It's these three parts of the chart that repeat over and over again. So we have another range-bound time here, and we are currently working through a bull run. If you went back in time, you would see that these three same structures play out over and over again on the chart. So now that we understand that there is this macro structure for the XRP chart, we can then analyze the bull run structures, and believe it or not, those bull run structures also have a repetitive structure within them. Let's take a look at that. So the essence of this bull run structure is it has three corrective phases. After the three corrective phases, it moves up to the peak. Now, the reason why I said the essence of it is because every time it plays out uniquely. And the reason for that is that when a fractal repeats, the timing, height, and depth, those parts do not copy over from the original fractal. Those parts will be original. So that allows for novelty in the new structure, even though it's repeating the basic idea. So the basic concept of the bull run is you have this range-bound time here. So price moves up out of that range-bound time. It hits this first correction. This first correction is denoted by the largest pullback that you see before anything else that came before it. And then it develops into a consolidation. After that, it moves up into the second bull run structure. This has two corrections, 1 and 2. Once it moves out of that, it goes into the third one. So typically, after it leaves this third correction, it goes to the peak. Now, from the peak here to the peak here, you can count, and this has happened 100% of the time, you can count 7 moves on a small time frame. Let's zoom in on a smaller time frame and count those moves. Okay, so I'm on an hour candle, and this is the high of the third corrective structure. So once it gets above that, we can start counting. Let's count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This part is part of this structure because it's in the shadow of this original pullback. So we have 7 moves to this peak. Now, as I pointed out in my other videos, just because you have 7 moves to a peak, we have the same situation over here where we have 7 moves to this peak right here. I'm not going to count it in this video. You can go back and watch my other videos where I do. But that in itself doesn't get us out of this potentially being the peak. So what does a peak structure look like? And I'm going to go through this real quick. Okay, so this is back in May 2017. And this is kind of a classic XRP peak structure where you have a main peak, and then it's followed by 2 smaller peaks. Once these 2 smaller peaks develop, you know that the peak structure is complete. It eventually goes into the declining structure. This declining structure can take a long time to play out. Okay, so here we are back at today's chart. Now, if this was the peak and we have 7 moves to this peak, there's different ways this could be playing out. So one possibility is that you have your main peak, and then you have the 2 smaller peaks, and now this is all part of the declining structure. Well, that could be the case, but I kind of don't think so. As I pointed out in my other videos, this is a very unusual peak structure. Yes, you do have the 3 peaks, but it's very sloppy, and it just doesn't look like the previous ones. It could also be playing out on a larger scale. So this could be the first peak. This is the second smaller peak, and we're currently working on that third smaller peak, or the second of the two smaller peaks. So if this is that third peak or the second of the two smaller peaks, what we would potentially see is that this would begin to consolidate, and then it would drop probably similar to this, and it would form just basically a smaller peak. That is something to be on the lookout for. I personally don't want to see that develop, but I think it is something that you should be aware of. So I know other analysts are just laughing at the concept of this being the peak. And I think they have valid arguments with the indicators that they're using that this is not the peak. But like I said, structurally, you can make an argument that this is the peak. So if we see something like that, know that this is likely the peak, and it would be a drastic decline like this. Now I'm going to argue that this is not the peak. So if we were to go back to that same bull run structure back in May 2017, I have this circled highlighted area. Now, I can't say 100% for sure that we are doing something similar to this, just much larger. So in this structure, you have your first corrective structure, you have your second corrective structure, you have your third corrective structure. It makes it above, price makes it above the high of this third corrective structure, and then it has this consolidation where it's not going vertical. So to count the moves to the peak, it really should be going vertical. So let's zoom in on this structure and get a better look at it. So once it makes it out of this kind of little sideways consolidation, it starts to move up fast, and we could start counting those moves. There should be 7 moves to the peak. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. 7 brings it to the peak, and then like I pointed out before, you have the 3 other peaks. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to copy this structure and paste it onto today's chart and see if there is some commonality. Okay, so here is that same structure. Of course, I've made it much larger to match what is going on today's chart. And while there are some differences, I would like to point out that there are actually a lot of similarities. So it would basically be starting from here, and you have kind of the moves up. So you can argue that this could be this, this is this, and then this is maybe this part right here, and then it goes to a peak. You have your first kind of wave and then your second wave. You see that here. And then it starts moving up in the fractal, whereas today's chart, it went kind of flat and sideways, but you still have this kind of part right here, which could be this, and then you have, in the fractal, you have these 2 peaks right here, which could be something like this. It declines in both the fractal and today's chart, and now it's moving up. In fact, you even have this angled part right here that could potentially be something like this. This actually has been my thesis that we are likely doing something like this. I have a hard time believing that today's peak is just a hair's breadth over the 2018 peak. So while that could be the case, I believe that something like this, just on a really large scale, could potentially be at play. There is another common fractal that big name analysts are using that use fractals. I'll show you which one that is. So that is this December 2017, and it peaks in 2018, January 2018 bull run structure. If we were to copy and paste this onto today's chart, it would look something like this. Now, there are a lot of commonalities and some differences. So you have this first move up. Now, when this originally played out, like I pointed out in my previous video, this was on the first and second corrective structure of the XRP bull run. However, I believe that this is really, today's structure is just a throwback to this concept. Instead of playing out on the first and second, it is now playing out on the third. So if this is at play, and I believe there's a good argument to say that it is, and I think it's still potentially following it. Now, the timing of this is a little different, so it matches fairly well all this right here. This wave right here could potentially be this, and then this one is this one. Today's chart just went lower than it did over here. You have this kind of flat area or this consolidation on both the chart and the fractal. You have this move up. Now, this is where it deviates, in my humble opinion. In 2017, it wasn't really that intense. Today's chart was much more intense. So you do have some deviation, but I would say overall, it's still potentially following the basic idea. So if this is at play, what we would like to see is it begin to start moving up. And like I pointed out in my previous video, if this is going to continue following, then what we would most likely expect this to be the peak and not this right here. And the reason for that is after price makes it out of this consolidation, it would go into its vertical phase. And from that point to the peak, there would be 7 moves. So the same would be true of this. Once it got above this high right here, we could start counting those 7 moves to the peak. If we get those 7 moves, folks, this is likely going to be the peak and not this. And the reason why it would stop following it is, first off, there's a big difference between the repetitive macro structure that I use, where we have the 3 corrective structures and then it moves up after that. Once it's going vertical, it has to be going vertical, and it gets above that 3rd corrective structure. You have 7 moves to the peak. All that is macro repetitive structure analysis. What this is kind of rummaging through history, shopping for a fractal that matches what today's chart is doing, and it can be a good guide. But just as we see deviations take place, for example, right here, that is a possibility, and it also is possible that it no longer follows this structure. So we don't know how the future will play out, but if it does continue following this basic idea, I would assume that this would be the peak and not this. Now, let's step back from all of this and look at the bigger picture. So this is the Bitcoin chart, and for those of you who've been following me, you know my view on Bitcoin. I believe we are in a peak structure. So this fractal is the peak/early part of the decline from the 2017/18 bull run structure. We can change it to the previous bull run structure. So this is the peak of the 2021 bull run structure. This is the all-time high it made back in 2021. As you can see, it is also following this basic idea. So we have multiple fractals that are saying the same thing. And if you watched my Bitcoin video where I said that this is likely the peak, of course it wasn't, this was. In there, I give the whole structural analysis that points that we are actually in the end of the Bitcoin bull run structure. So what is happening over here? Well, on my Discord, which is connected to my Patreon, it's a $5 a month subscription, I discussed how this move up could potentially move up higher than what it shows here in this 2021 fractal or this 2017/18 fractal. And it's doing just that, in my opinion. I don't know how high it will go. It has actually potential to make it above this high. Now, I don't believe it's going to go on to another major leg of a bull run structure. I believe the time for that has passed. What is possible, though, is that we have, within this greater peak structure, we have 2 possibilities. It makes a new high and it kind of stays up there, but then eventually comes crashing back down. Or it does a retrace, and in this retrace, crypto comes to life. Let's jump over to the Bitcoin dominance. Okay, so this is the Bitcoin dominance chart, and this fractal is from around the same time frame of the 2017/2018 bull run. So this fractal, I don't know if it's at play. I originally thought maybe it was playing out over here, something like this, but as this has continued to develop, I'm beginning to realize that actually this is a potential way this is at play. So if this continues to follow this basic idea, we would see the dominance begin to decline. Now, I don't know if it's going to continue following this note for note. It may do something unique, but follow the basic concept. We'll have to see how this develops, but it is potentially close to more substantial declines, which I believe makes the case that this little peak above the 2018 all-time high for XRP is not the peak, and it's going to move up once again. Okay, so this is the Dow Jones, and I would like to propose that this is the clock to which all crypto should be weighed against. It is my belief that the Dow Jones has been following this fractal from 2018 to March 2020. This decline is the C19 crash. It is my belief that the Dow Jones, really all indexes, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, the Russell 2000, they're all telling us the same story. Let's zoom into this part of the structure. So it is my belief that this wave right here is potentially this wave. It is possible that it could be this. However, I'm not 100% convinced on that. In the other indexes, there is still more room to move up. I believe that this wave is this, and if it is, hopefully soon, knock on wood, we will see it get above this high. Once the Dow Jones gets above this high, I believe it will be a boost to crypto, and it is in this time when it gets above this high that crypto will really come to life, but it's going to be a short-lived thing. This is not going to take very long. I don't know when this will play out. It could happen this month in March. Who knows? Time will tell. But all this, I believe, points to the possibility, or I won't say fact, but the possibility that this is not the end of the line for XRP. Now, in my last video, I threw out the possibility that this was potentially just being repeated over here. So this is what that fractal would look like. Now, the light blue is basically the whole structure, so that would start from here, and it would include all of this. As you can see, there is some commonality to all of this. However, once it gets to this decline on today's chart, this in the fractal was much smaller. If we stretch this part out to match what is going on here, I believe it potentially is still following this structure. Let's zoom in onto this part. We do have the basic idea playing out here. We even have this pullback before moving up. Now, today's move up was much bigger than what this was. So this gives me hope, but we do want to be on the lookout for a potential kind of repeat of this idea. So if we see something like this play out, should start thinking that it could be the peak. But as of now, I like what it's doing. This is bullish in my opinion. Once we get above this high, we should start counting the 7 moves. Now, it may not follow this note for note. This is, once again, as I pointed out, me shopping through history, looking for a potential match. And as I pointed out, when you do that, things can break, things can deviate. But if this is not the peak, once it gets above this high, we have 7 moves on a small time frame, folks. I'm going to be on an hour candle, most likely, to count that. Once it gets to the peak, then that would be the peak. So there you have it, folks. That's the way I see XRP at the moment. I remain bullish, even though I am aware that there is structurally the possibility it is the peak. I hope this video was helpful. It's not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. If you are interested in joining my Discord, I will put a link to my Patreon in the description of this video. It's a $5 a month subscription. We have great conversation, and there's some really good people in there that have a really good grasp on XRP as well. If this is your first time watching my channel, I recommend hitting that subscribe button. I'll continue to follow up on this chart. I don't do the typical technical analysis, which is, by the way, great. But what I do is I focus on chart structure. I use macro repetitive structures. It's a unique form of TA. So it's something that you're not going to find anywhere else. So if you're not yet a subscriber, I recommend hitting that subscribe button. And like I said, I'll continue to follow up on this chart as it continues to develop. I'm so glad you caught this video. I hope you catch my next one. Have a great day, and bye for now.